Okay, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today I've brought on a guest, which is J. Scott Christianson, and I will allow you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Scott. You can just call me Scott here, and I am currently an assistant teaching professor at the University of Missouri. I teach in the management department, and I teach a lot about information systems. And as you can imagine, there's a lot going on right now when we think about business, when we think about how
Mhm.
information systems are changing things and affecting our society. And so I really enjoy my position here and getting to interact with students as we think through what impacts these things are going to have on us. But previous to joining the University of Missouri, I ran my own IT business for about 15, 18 years or so. So did a
Mhm.
lot of work in video conferencing and got to have a very interesting career there, learning how to run a business.
Okay, so what is it that you mainly focus on in your as being a professor at the University of Missouri?
So we talk a lot about how information systems are used, how they're managed. We talk about information security. We talk about project management. So there's a wide range of issues, as you can imagine, that people going into business or people that are going to be running different organizations have to think about when it comes to how these systems are going to be run and how they're going to be used effectively to compete in a marketplace, but also, like I said, with a lot of things that are going on right now with changing regulation, how do we protect personal information? How do we think about privacy? All that kind
Mhm.
of stuff.
Mhm. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to ask you about was is how artificial intelligence is being used by humans to manipulate others. So, so
Well, that's actually a topic we're going to be talking about next week. So, artificial intelligence is a kind of a broad term, right,
mhm,
for a lot of different technologies. Of course,
mhm,
some of us think about what we call general AI, which is, the thinking machine. So, there's been lots and lots of movies about this where we have some machine that may be benevolent or malevolent, either one, as far as their interaction with humans, but it's able to think on its own. But really,
mhm,
what most artificial intelligence is today is a narrow field called machine learning.
mhm,
And basically, what we can do with machine learning is that we can give a computer kind of a starting point of algorithms, and we can train it to do various things. So one of the things that we can train it to do is try to hit certain goals. So if I say, well, I would like on my social media platform to have Chris watch more videos, okay,
mhm,
we're a YouTube style social media platform. Well, it doesn't say I want him to watch more videos that are going to be
mhm,
truthful or that are watch more videos that are going to make him feel better about his life and the world, but
mhm,
I just want him to watch more videos, right? So it may just be considered relatively benign when you deploy this algorithm, but it
mhm,
may be that you get excited by certain things that are either not correct. So you start to think, oh, well, the government is hiding aliens from us, or they are
yeah,
doing some other sort of thing, and you that tends to engage you more. The algorithm doesn't care, right? So it just cares that you have more engagement. So that's one of the ways that I don't think we need to be fearful of some general AI. We need to be fearful of these platforms where somebody is designing something to manipulate our behavior, to encourage certain behaviors, or to even shift our ideas. Okay, so
mhm,
if say, okay, well, Scott, I know Scott is, kind of a middle of the road guy, and I'd like him to vote for my candidate.
mhm,
Maybe what I can do is try to test different ideas. So I'll put an ad up about something he cares about, and I'll see if I can use that to kind of drive his beliefs toward preferring a certain candidate. So it really is
mhm,
starting to get these kind of weird areas where you start to have more like psychological operations rather than just, um, you know, strict advertising. And
mhm.
and you've probably seen, Chris, that there's going on with this right now. We had, what, it was 2 weeks ago now, that Twitter kind of dropped the bomb and said we're not going to be taking political ads,
Mhm.
right? And uh, A little bit of a slam from Jack Dorsey on Mark Zuckerberg, and
Yep.
but it's probably not that simple, right? Because really, what Twitter did was they said, well, we can't understand what's going on here, so we're just kind of throwing up our arms, and we're going to say we're not going to deal with it.
Hmm.
That might be a good idea to do with a technology you don't understand, or something you don't know how to regulate. But we're
Hmm.
now got a whole nother set of problems, right? So what is a political ad? So if I say vote for the Clean Streets Act in Columbia, Missouri,
Hmm.
that's maybe political ad. Well, what if I just put out, hey, I'm Scott, and I just really think we should have clean streets? Well,
Hmm.
is that now a political ad? So it's kind of
Yeah.
substituting one set of problems for another. But it's one of the reasons you see Facebook, Google, all these different platforms being highly criticized is the artificial intelligence that's behind it. It makes them so effective, but it also makes them so dangerous, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the big topics that we're kind of discussing now. And not only that, but then just going beyond, or not beyond, but maybe alongside those issues are what is the effect on social media on ourselves, right?
Hmm.
We did a little experiment last week where I picked on certain students and I asked them to unlock their iPhone so I could see how much social media time they had spent, and some of them were upward of 6 to 7 hours a day.
Wow.
And it comes in little slices, right? A little 10 minutes here, maybe an hour here, and you don't really realize how much that's added up. Of course, we're getting to
Hmm.
the end of the semester, and students are like, "Oh, I don't have time to study. I don't have time to write that paper." But I said, "Well, what if I told you you could reclaim 6 hours a day of your life, and what would that effect have?" Now, I can't say that my generation is somehow immune to that because we tend to be addicted to our emails, right? So
Hmm.
that new email came in. Oh, I just wasted a bunch of time responding to some email that probably I should have just ignored, right?
Yep.
So it's a human trait, not necessarily a generational type of thing or technology
Hmm.
dependent thing.
Hmm. Yeah. So like social media was basically just designed to be addictive, especially like Instagram, Twitter. So like they make it so you constantly want to keep getting more information from learning about what your friends are doing, what your favorite celebrities are saying. And so
Right, exactly.
they designed all the interfaces to attract you to want more.
And in fact, I have a book here called Persuasive Technology. It's
Hmm.
by B.J. Fogg, and using computers to change what we think and do. Dr. Fogg is a professor at Stanford, and as you are probably well aware, a lot of these companies are within biking distance of the Stanford campus out in California. And he writes about how, things like the infinite scroll, where it just scrolls down and down and down, and you're just kind of a random reward. So you don't know if that next thing is going to give you that little dopamine hit where you get excited about it. And that's exactly what we get out of social media. If you get likes, you get that little dopamine hit. And so
Hmm.
I sometimes say that this should be in the forbidden section of the library, kind of like in Harry Potter.
Hmm.
He wrote this book not necessarily to encourage people to manipulate other people, but I think he was trying to point out the dangers of it. But unfortunately, that kind of backfired on him. And so a lot of those things that we see that are copied, if Snapchat has a feature and it ends up being more addictive, we see that copied into other platforms.
Hmm.
And again, it's about maximizing that engagement so that you can maximize ad revenue. And that's another thing that we kind of discuss from a business perspective. If you look at a company like Apple or Amazon, those are one of the big tech companies that we think about, and they have a fairly diverse revenue stream. So they don't make their money just from videos or selling books or selling things online. Amazon also has a platform called AWS where they make a lot of money from, which is,
Mm-hmm.
offers a service.
Yep.
And Apple has, obviously products, phone products, PC products. They're trying to get into different types of services, so iCloud and things like that. But you look at Facebook and Google, well, they've diversified their expenses. They bought the Oculus, and Google screws around with driverless cars and stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm.
all their income is still advertising. They have no other income base other than that advertising. So for them, they can't really, walk away from this particular aspect. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Certainly, it's gotten the attention of politicians. Here in Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
we are represented by Senator Josh Hawley, is one of our two representatives, and he's actually proposed a bill that says that you should not allow that infinite scrolling. So
Uh-huh.
you would actually, if you were one of these social media platforms, you'd have to um, not have that built in. That would be kind of a forbidden technology. So, what do you think about that, Chris? Do you think that's
Yeah,
something we should be legislating, or?
yeah, I can definitely see the benefits of that. There is definitely a problem in social media addiction, particularly among young people. But I'm just wondering, what would be like the alternative to the internet scrolling?
Well, the alternative would be something that might scroll a little bit, or you have to go from one page to another. That requires some user interaction. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a little bit more thoughtful,
Mm-hmm.
or it may
More
stop.
intentional.
Yeah, so it just stops at a certain point, and that's where you're done, or you have to go to the next page or something like that.
Mm-hmm. I find Instagram does that a little bit now. It's got the feature where after you scroll through all the new posts, then it says you're all caught up instead of just going on through all different posts, even pages that you don't follow. And if you want that stuff, then you have to go to the Explore section where you can see all those different posts.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's interesting because I think there is some generational differences in how people consume these products. It's interesting to me too that maybe 10 years ago, a lot of the students were really oversharing things.
Mhm.
So a lot of my students now are much more um, deliberate in who they share with. They have protected Instagram accounts. They have
Mhm.
protected Twitter accounts, and so in some respects they're a little smarter. Unfortunately, not always. There was a situation that came up where a student had sent a picture that they wanted to blur a certain part out. Okay, and you can
Mhm.
figure out what that picture might be about. But
Mhm.
in Snapchat, really that's a layer, and they thought they had altered the picture, and so they sent that picture to a group, and
Mhm.
then somebody could just say, "Oh, well, view the original," right? And
Mhm.
so then they could see it without the blurred part. So I think there's still, a lot of misunderstanding about how these platforms really get used, right? And
Mhm.
um, I think that's, a problem. There's no warning that says like, oh, you understand you're really not altering the original photo, or do you want to
Mhm.
alter their photo? So there was an instance that cropped up not too long ago that was about that feature or about that aspect of not understanding how Snapchat really worked. So
Mhm. Yeah. Another thing that I want to look at is regulation of social media, and so that's one thing I want to ask you about.
right, so it's kind of a hot topic nowadays. I just talked about that idea that you might regulate certain aspects of
Mhm.
social media.
Yeah.
There is
Or
something called
or
the
break up
COPPA Act.
different.
Yeah, there's something called the COPPA Act, where basically it says that without a parental consent, you if you're under 13, you cannot have a social media account.
Mhm.
However, that's violated, right and left. And what's really disturbing is I think people, especially of teenage age, there's a lot of social pressures. You want to be liked. And it's not only the addictive quality or how they're spending their time, but there's people out there that prey on kids like that as well. And in fact, in 2 weeks, I will have Detective Tracy Perkins from the Boone County Cybercrimes Task Force come and talk to us about the crimes that she investigates. And she and I think maybe 3 or 4 deputies are full-time with this. They have a full-time prosecutor. And we're a relatively small county. My city I'm living in here is about 120,000 people. But yet there's a huge amount of cybercrime, and unfortunately a lot of it is sex crimes against children. And so this often starts on social media, on different chat forums, or people finding people on social media, getting them to go to these places. And I've really, personally, I got rid of Facebook. I got rid of Instagram. I do still do Twitter and Reddit, and what I've done is I've deleted those off my phone. So I have an iPad at home, and I can obviously do it from a computer. Makes it a little more hard, and it limits my usage of that, right? But if you were to hear Detective Perkins and some of the things that have happened, you would start to get more convinced that really, allowing anybody under 18 to have a social media account is probably a really bad idea. Now that, obviously, all these platforms are going to push back against it, but 18 is, except for drinking alcohol, 18 is kind of that age, right? So you can join the military, you can enter into private contracts, you can be sued, you can be charged as an adult, you can get married, all these kind of good things when you're 18, and so that might be a more appropriate age for looking at, how we regulate these platforms. So I think it's a difficult thing, but I think more people are becoming aware of it. I don't know if you saw in the last couple of weeks, Facebook reported their earnings. Their user engagement was actually down, but their earnings were way up. Once again, because this machine learning is very effective. Okay, if I am the Acme company, and I want to get you to click on ads, and I put a couple $1 million behind that, you and a lot of people like you, I'm probably going to get a lot of clicks. So it's actually a very good marketing strategy is to use Facebook, because they have so much data about you and so much metadata, so they can correlate. The people that get on Facebook at night tend to click on more ads to buy things. Okay, so that's more effective time for buying clothes, or for buying, if you're a male, probably for buying gadgetry. Okay, maybe you've had a drink or two, so don't drink and shop online, right? So, they can correlate all this stuff, and then use it very effectively. We used to say in marketing that half of your marketing dollars are wasted. You just don't know which half. And these platforms have really changed that dynamic, that it's not just a shotgun approach. You're not just buying some airtime or some newspaper ads. Now you can really target. I want to see males that are of this age, that are going to the University of Missouri, that also are into skateboards. Okay. And so it's very effective advertising and targeting, and it works. How do you deal with a company like Facebook or Google? Because there's not going to be anybody that's going to be effective to compete with them. So should these be regulated more like a monopoly, where maybe as a competitor to Google, you also have the ability to see some of Google's data, or sharing that data like it was a public resource, like more like it's a public utility. And there's some arguments for breaking up these companies. So Facebook, of course, absorbed WhatsApp, Instagram, and so now you have Facebook is very rapidly trying to integrate all three of these. And I would say that part of the reason they're willing to do that is because they don't want regulators to come in and say, oh, you got to break these out. You can't have all three of the major platforms used in the Western world. Of course, in China, they're going to use things like WeChat, okay, which are dominant. And I think Facebook wants to be the WeChat for the rest of the world. And that's why they propose things like this Libra cryptocurrency that if it was proposed by some other company, it probably would have gone somewhere, but nobody trusts Facebook to effectively do that.
So you, what's that?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, so would you support breaking up companies like Facebook, Google, those places, or?
I think Facebook, that they never should have been allowed to acquire these other adjacent platforms that were competitors, because it's just sucked all the air out of that place from a competitive standpoint. And I would say that we break them up, not because we're mad at Facebook per se, but because we're capitalists, right? And so look at AT&T and how that was broken up. That unleashed enormous economic gains. Enormous companies were created. Most people don't remember, but back in the early 70s, you couldn't connect or even go buy a telephone that wasn't an AT&T telephone or licensed through AT&T, because you were not allowed to connect anything to the network for fear it might damage it. Okay, that was their excuse. Well, so you couldn't buy a modem. Okay. So you wonder why the telecommunications that happened in the 80s was all with modems and things like that? Well, that was because we were allowed to actually attach something that didn't have an AT&T logo on it to our telephone lines. And so that really changed things, and I think it would unleash a huge amount of potential if you had these companies competing against each other. So let's say that Google and YouTube were broken up. So Google's the number one search engine. Number two it could be considered Amazon, depending on how you look at the data, or it's YouTube. Okay, and I do it all the time. If I have a problem at home with my washer and dryer, I'm on YouTube, right? I'm like, how do you fix a dryer like this, right?
Yeah.
And or even here at school, if I'm trying to do something in a spreadsheet and do an analysis that's not working, how do I do that, right? So it's a great tool. But if you were to break those two up, it wouldn't be long before YouTube might think about, how could we get into search? How could we use what people are searching here for videos to develop a search engine? And I bet you Google would be like, okay, how do we get into video? How can we do something with video? So I think you would actually start to see enormous potential. You'd see ability for other companies to come into the space and start to compete as well. But right now, unite Google and YouTube. I do know there's at least one other video service, as a Vimeo, I believe, that's some popular in certain niches, but they're just really. It would be hard for us to come up. Even if you and I had a better idea, we would get no funding for that, right? If we had a better search engine idea, because they would say there's no way you can compete with them.
Yeah, it really allows for more technological innovation and competition, because now when they're broken up, they're able to try to outdo their competitors. So one of them tries to come up with a new idea that's better than the others, and the other ones come up with another idea. So like Google came out with Google Glass, and Apple comes out with the Apple Watch, and they're all trying to come up with new great technologies.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's the way to look at it, and that's the correct way to look at it. So if you think about now, WhatsApp is competing with Messenger. Okay, that's going to change the dynamic of that WhatsApp platform. Are we now going to have built-in payment systems in there? And how is that going to differ from the built-in payment systems of Messenger, kind of like Venmo or something like that? So I think there's a strong argument for, and these are anti-competitive companies, and that's why they either need to be regulated or broken up.
Yeah.
So I think it's another thing that we might think of that as far as regulation and talking in more generic terms, not just about a particular company, is the idea of an FDA for technology. Okay, so Food and Drug Administration doesn't let Scott go out and just start selling some elixir, right? That I say it's going to make you stronger. It has to be, there's some regulation about what you can say, what you can have as far as the contents. So I can't put in radioactive materials into that elixir and sell it. That's actually how the FDA got started, was back in the early part of last century. People were selling these snake oil products, and they had one that contained radium, and people started dying from it at a high frequency. And that's how the FDA came about. So same sort of thing. Okay, well, should teens be able to consume something that has an infinite scroll, that has a certain level of addictiveness? Well, we don't allow teens to consume nicotine, right, or tobacco products, because it has a certain level of addictiveness that we say we're going to reserve for adulthood, when in theory you're going to have a better judgment about that. So do we need an FDA for technology? Some people have kind of called on that as an idea.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to bring up was surveillance capitalism, and I was wondering, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so surveillance capitalism is kind of like we were just talking about with Google and with Facebook, where they are, let's just talk about Google. You think about all the different services they have. So they have Gmail, but they look at your emails, right? Not only the email content, but the email of who you sent it to, when you sent it, where you are when you send it, where the other person is, all that metadata. When I get on Google Maps and I use that to go to my barber shop, okay, it starts to know when does Scott leave, when does he leave work, when does he go to the barber, all this type of metadata, not just what route did he drive. And so they're able to surveil this, what some people have called like data exhaust. And so this data exhaust, this stuff we leave behind long after we've gone to the barber, or long after we've searched something on Google, is able to be used to provide us with these ads. And so that's this idea that we're not making money by providing a direct service per se. We're making money by harvesting data and then using that data that by surveilling somebody, basically, and using that data to either manipulate their behavior or to, generally get them to buy something, right? So that's this idea of surveillance capitalism. And there's a very good book by that title. I will warn folks that it's somewhat academic. So it's a little bit, it's 780 some pages. It took me most of the summer to get through it, because I could read about 10 pages at a time. But there's a couple other good ones. There's one called Like War, which is very interesting, about how social media and AI is being used in by governments, right? So governments to influence policy. I tell you what, I do have a website. It's called learnabout.ai, so not .com or .net.
Okay.
And I've
learnabout.ai.
Yeah, learnabout.ai, and it's got all those books listed, as well as some alternatives. So if you don't want to read that whole book, that author has done several podcasts and several interviews that you can watch. And so I try and list all that, as well as some AI applications that you can try out for your iPhone or Android, if you want to really think about, how is this, can this technology be used?
Yeah. So another thing that I want to bring up was what do you think about regulating artificial intelligence? So like what someone like Elon Musk proposes in order to make sure that we don't end up in a catastrophic event with like a technological singularity.
I think, one, I do think the singularity idea is probably a long ways further off than most people realize. A lot of AI is kind of dumb. The one point that Elon Musk makes that I think we should think about is how fast things move. So there's this idea called Moore's Law, where the
Mhm.
speed of a processor doubles every 2 years. Now that's
Mhm.
starting to slow down, but we now have cloud computing where we can aggregate processors, and things are getting faster and faster and
Mhm.
faster. And so the rate of improvement is fairly astonishing, even on these machine
Mhm.
learning. But I think that is something that we need to look at, because um, it can be used, by governments to manipulate people. It can be used in lots of different ways. So in the short term, in the long term, what you're talking about, I think has some merit as well. So we need to start having that discussion. And just like we had kind of a nuclear proliferation treaty,
Mhm.
right? So we try to limit the ways in which you can use nuclear material,
Mhm.
and especially in those extremely dangerous ways like nuclear weapons.
Mhm.
Might try to limit the way that this type of computing power can be used as well. And
Mhm.
so I think that that's something that we need to see more discussion on. Unfortunately, I think a lot of that discussion is happening in the EU and in other countries. And I think, I don't know if we're just too distracted by our social media or what, but we're not seeing that discussion happening here so much.
Yeah. So, yeah. So even though this singularity is probably a long ways down the road, do you see it happening where it's going to be a major problem? Like maybe the this these this tech the AI is going to have a will that is in direct contrast to our own, or do you think it's going to be a little more in tune with our own?
Well, I think that's once again kind of the discussion we have to have. So not only Elon Musk, but also Stephen Hawking, who the famous physicist who passed away, talked about this, that you have to set some ground rules. So
Hmm.
if you remember, like Asimov had his rules for robotics, right? So
Hmm.
the first one I think was that a robot shall do nothing to harm or cause injury to a human.
Hmm.
Will do everything it can to protect a human from harm, and will then at the last rules that if it can to protect itself, provided that it puts the human first, right?
Hmm.
So I think can you build in, if you're trying to do a general AI, are there certain principles that can be built in that would assure us that we have the AI that gets developed that is going to be an ally to humans rather than an adversary. Okay?
Hmm.
So, if you, I tell you, I'll give you. This is not on the Learn About AI, but if you want to watch an old movie from my generation called War Games,
War
and it's with
games.
yes, with a very young Matthew Broderick. It was
Hmm.
considered for many years one of the best movies as far as technology, because he uses some what we call war dialing to uh, figure out where certain computers are and things like that. And
Hmm.
also Ali Sheedy's in that, and several other folks that you'll recognize. And it talks about what if AI was being used in war, right? So
Hmm.
could it set up certain scenarios whereby we turn over the use of military technology to some AI. Now, there are probably some great arguments for doing that, right? If
Hmm.
you're, a parent and your son or daughter is going out to the battlefield, would you rather have them going alongside an AI that can help them determine where the enemy is or make that
Hmm.
war end? Well, sure you would, right? And
Yep.
certainly we want to minimize the loss of life in war, but
Hmm.
you could imagine a scenario if you turn over these systems to some sort of AI. It could be really dangerous pretty fast.
Yeah. One one thing that I wonder about with artificial intelligence is, so let's say you program into it that that doesn't want to harm or kill any humans, and it wants to protect us as much as possible. So what if it took that? so literally that it just decided to put us into some sort of like surveillance state, where all of a sudden it's like it's just controlling everything that we do, and it's trying to protect us. But like we really don't have any choice as far as our actions within our life.
Right. Yeah. So why don't they
Hmm.
just sedate us all,
Hmm.
right? Give us all some sedative, and then we'll be compliant.
Hmm.
And I just had a foot surgery done, so the first thing they do when you come in there is they give you an IV with some happy juice, they call it.
Hmm.
And it basically makes you do whatever they tell you to do, roll
Hmm.
over, sit back, do this. Um, but yeah, so that would not be a good scenario either, because humans, we need challenges, right? So we need
Hmm.
challenges, we need things. We may complain about them. We may lose sleep over our challenges, but we need to be pushing ourselves at a certain
Hmm.
level. And I think it'll be interesting to see how things happen in the coming decade. We already have one presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, who's been
Yeah.
talking a lot about how do we get ready for AI. So his big concern being the jobs that will be lost due to AI. And are we going to reap the benefits of that, or
Hmm.
just certain companies going to reap the benefits of that?
Hmm.
Should we have he calls it a benefit or freedom dividend, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah.
And others have called for a universal basic income. And what would that look like? And there are other examples of that. So Alaska, for example, if you're a citizen of Alaska, you get a dividend essentially from the oil, right?
Hmm.
So in Norway has a similar program as well. So if you were a trucker and now the autonomous trucks are gone, it's going to be, should you get some sort of reward for, the system of trucking that got set up that is now being automated.
Hmm.
So it's an interesting question. And some people believe that, well, AI is going to create more jobs than it destroys. But I think there
Hmm.
is some evidence that this may be unlike previous technical revolutions. And it is probably more difficult to go from the factory to being an AI programmer than was to go from, for example, from the
Hello.
farm factory. Oh, I'm still here. Are you still there? Hello?
Hello.
Hello, I'm here. Hello, can you hear me?
Okay. Just yeah. Just kind of lagged a little bit there for a second.
Okay, good. Well, I don't know if the recording on this gets recorded in the cloud, but maybe it'll all be there.
Hmm. Okay. So
So,
what was just the last like minute that the last 20 seconds that you said?
yeah, so uh, we have one presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, that's been looking at how AI is going to affect jobs. And some people will argue that, well, AI will displace certain industries, but will
Hmm.
create new jobs, right, in different areas. Maybe an AI programmer or something. But I think there's a good argument to be made that this revolution is different than previous ones.
Hmm.
Yes, here at the university, we no longer have typists in a steno pool. We used to have
Hmm.
people, that's all they did was typing, right?
Hmm.
Uh, we had computers. Now we have an IT department. We have people selling technology, servicing technology.
Hmm.
So there's probably been a good shift, right? Because those are higher paying jobs. But it's probably much more difficult to go from being a truck driver to being an AI programmer than it is in previous revolutions where it was you were going from being a farmer to being working in a factory, right?
Hmm.
So it's just a different type of work, and it may require, because of this machine learning, may require many, many less people. Okay, and
Hmm.
it's also places like accounting that are going to be affected by this. So a lot of the basic accounting work is drudgery that has a very effective pattern for it, right? So there's a certain pattern that when you're reconciling books or something like that, and so that might be automated. Radiology is probably going to change very quickly, very, very
Hmm.
fast, because that's a area where the radiologist is good at pattern matching. great application for machine learning, very good at pattern matching. And in fact, they're finding that some of these AIs that do radiology
Mm-hmm.
are just as good or better than radiologists right now. So how do radiologists change their profession, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe we don't need as many radiologists in the future.
Yep. So do you see universal basic income such as the freedom dividend to be to be a good remedy for some of the displaced jobs in from increasing automation?
Well,
Or do you
I would
think there's
say
another solution?
um, I think it's something we need to look at. I think it's something we should try. I think there's some people have a knee-jerk reaction against it because they think, oh well, I don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
People shouldn't not work. But I find here at the university that there's a lot of people that would actually probably go out and start their own business if they
Mm-hmm.
had, a little bit of security,
Yeah.
either with some sort of healthcare coverage. We have
Mm-hmm.
great healthcare here at the university,
Mm-hmm.
and if you could even say, okay, well, I know my family's still covered, or I know I'm not going to have to make everything. I'm at least going to be able to pay for some food or something like that
Yep.
from this income, they would probably go start their own business. And so I think it
Mm-hmm.
would actually be an economic boon if we
Yeah.
had some of these things. This idea that people are inherently lazy or something, I don't
Mm-hmm.
believe at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think if they're given the right incentives, people do want to take on new challenges and do want to create
Mm-hmm.
their own business. I think America is a very entrepreneurial place, but unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
startups right now are at an all-time low.
Yeah.
Okay, the highest they were was in the 1970s. Okay, when we
Yeah.
uh, uh, so I think we need to do something to jumpstart this, and I think there's experiments going on with this right now. And so I think it's at least worth looking into.
Yeah. I think there will be some people that they take their $1,000 a month and they don't really do anything productive with it. But I think, as a general rule, most people will take it and they'll do something. They'll invest in in creative interests. They'll start a business or do whatever to contribute to the economy.
Yeah, we may end up with tens of thousands of really crappy
Hmm.
songwriters
Hmm.
moving around the streets, but that's probably okay, right?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so I'd rather live in a world like that than one where people are homeless or
Afraid
something.
to, afraid to
Yeah,
try anything new.
right, right, and so um, I think that. It's we also need to start focusing on uh, not how do we have a good job or a good income, but how do we have a good life,
Hmm.
right? So that's one of the concerns I have. Some of the attitudes we have in business schools is, we got to have a good job, and a good job means it pays this much. Well,
Hmm.
it's a good job meaning that you feel like you're doing something worthwhile with your life, that you're engaged with it, that you're working with people you respect.
Hmm.
There's a lot of things about my job that are not about income, right? So I get to do things that challenge me. I get to work with people I respect and work on hard problems. So
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
makes it worthwhile. So
All right. So, just some finishing thoughts here. So, are you hopeful for the future of technology, AI, social media? Do you see a
I am
positive future?
yeah, I'm always an optimist. Being a former business owner, you have to be an optimist, I think. And I am hopeful that we're starting to take a look at how AI is going to really change things. I think we're starting to ask critical questions. I am glad to see that we have a presidential candidate, and probably more of them will be doing this, is raising these questions about AI,
Yeah.
raising these questions about social media. Because I think if people really understand what's going on, they'll make some good decisions.
Hmm. Okay. So, are there any finishing thoughts you'd like to make, or
No,
as I
you can,
take that's about?
like I said, it's great to talk about these things, and
Hmm.
hope your listeners will find it interesting. If
Yeah.
they do want to contact me, and at learnabout.ai, there is a link there to contact me if they want.
Hmm.
And if they have any suggestions, so there's a little form at the bottom. If they have a book or a video or something like that that they would suggest that would be really good for learning about AI, I would be very interested in hearing from them.
Okay. So that's been the show for today, ladies and gentlemen, with Scott Christianson. You can find him on Twitter at jscottmo. This has been Point Counterpoint. Thank you for coming on.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Take care.
Yep, you too.